Ladies and gentlemen, I just got done seeing Gladiator II in theaters, and this is going to be my spoiler-free review for the film. As these reviews always go, I'm going to go through the positives, then the negatives, and then give the movie a rating out of 10. I was really looking forward to Gladiator II because, of course, I love the first Gladiator film. I actually did a reaction to it on this channel about a year or two ago, I think right before I started Game of Thrones, and I loved it. It's within my top 50 favorite movies ever. Absolutely loved the story it told, loved the acting, loved pretty much everything about it. I think it's a perfect movie. So I was very excited to hear that Ridley Scott was going to be making a sequel to it because I thought a sequel made sense. Obviously having Lucius be the main character, it made perfect sense. I was all up for it. The trailers looked phenomenal and I just could not wait to see it. And now that I've seen it, what are my thoughts? Let's get into this. Starting off with the positives, the movie has some insane and incredible action sequences. When we're talking about the gladiator moments, obviously that's kind of how the first Gladiator film was, where there was a bunch of different gladiator scenes, and there were so many great ones in that first film, but this one honestly outdoes the first film in terms of the action because they do some crazy stuff that is all really well shot, really well choreographed, really well directed. Everything looks great visually. That all was on point for the entire film. There was an incredible battle that the movie opens up with, and then you get into the gladiator sequences. There's like sharks. I mean, this isn't spoilers because this was in the trailer, but there's sharks, there's a rhino, there's scenes with a bunch of monkeys, or I guess they're some sort of ape. I'm not really sure exactly what the species was, but regardless, it was a cool scene, and a bunch of other scenes like that later on in the film that are just so awesome, so large scale, and are delivered practically perfectly. So all of that was fantastic, really no complaints there. And when it comes to the politics of this movie, I did find it kind of interesting in comparison to the first film because the first film was very much focused on one main antagonist, and obviously that was Commodus, and he was like the main focus there. But in this movie, there's a lot more moving pieces within the just overall politics of this the empire of Rome. And so you have so many different moving pieces, so many different characters with different motivations and characters that try to scheme over each other. And I think they did a pretty good job with it in terms of the direction of the different scheming that's going on. But that part of it I thought was really, really cool. They actually focused on it quite a bit. Even though I think Commodus in the first movie as a character is way better and way more interesting than any character that was in this movie, I do think they had just more moving pieces going around, and that I did appreciate. One of my favorite characters in this movie was definitely Denzel Washington's Macrinus. I'm terrible with the names in this. They're just, I gotta say right off the bat, the names were hard to keep track of. They rarely said them, so whenever they did, I was like, I gotta keep track of that name. But his character was pretty good, mainly because of Denzel Washington's acting. He's definitely one of the best actors. I feel like that's still acting today. He's got to be up there as one of the best, at least in my opinion. And he is probably the best performer in this entire film. He probably steals the show more than anyone. And there's a lot of great moments with him, and in particular with the politics of all of this. And his character went in a direction that I was not expecting at all, which I appreciated because I was expecting him to be very similar to another character from the first movie that had a similar role to play. But it was a very different direction. I really like that. I also do like that the emperors here, which yes, they do have two emperors rather than just one. I like that both of them are extremely different than Commodus from the first film. They went in a very different direction. They did not just copy and paste Commodus and just put him as the emperor. I would have been kind of annoyed if they did that, but they actually found a way to have some new emperors that are very, very different, have very different roles to play. And that I really appreciated. Even though I don't think they were nearly as good as Commodus, again, it's kind of hard to beat Joaquin Phoenix in that first film. I do think they were really solid for what roles they were given. Pedro Pascal was also really great in this movie as well. His character, unfortunately, I don't think did enough for me to get fully love the character, but I do think there was a couple different story arcs with him that I actually really, really liked, and I thought it was going in a really interesting direction. I probably just don't like the overall outcome of it, but I do think most of it was pretty good. And then of course there's Paul Mescal as Lucius, and honestly I was debating putting it in the negative because I really just didn't think he grabbed me the same way that Russell Crowe did as Maximus in the first film. But I thought to myself, like, that is just me comparing this movie to the first movie too much. And I feel like I need to step away from doing that too much because I feel like it gets to a point where it's like, of course, certain things might not be better than the first movie, but that's okay at the end of the day. So even though I was just immediately comparing him to Russell Crowe, I just decided to sit back and say, was he actually just good on his own? And yes, I think he was, not only as a performer, but also as a character. I think he did a great job in this movie. I just don't think there was as much emotion tied to the character. Even though they attempted an emotional arc with him, that just didn't work for me as much as I think it could have. I would still put it in the positives though, because I still think he was really great for the most part. And lastly, for the positives, the soundtrack was incredible. I mean, it was in the first movie as well. It was actually composed by Harry Gregson Williams. That was not the composer of the first movie. The first movie was composed by Hans Zimmer, but he did a great job. Like, this was a solid soundtrack. I don't think it was as good as the first. They did reuse some tracks here and there as well, which I was okay with because it's a sequel. It's kind of expected. But I thought it was really solid. There was a lot of great pieces of music in this movie. All in all, this was a crowd-pleasing movie for sure. Very, very entertaining. But there are some negatives that we have to get into. First of all, I really don't feel like the movie proves its purpose as a sequel. And I need to make this absolutely clear. I have no issue with sequels existing, especially if they don't need to exist. I've always said this. I hate the argument of, oh, this movie doesn't need a sequel. Who cares, man? Like, it doesn't. No, most movies don't need sequels. Terminator did not need a sequel, yet it did, and it was amazing. Alien did not need a sequel, yet it got one, and it was amazing. You don't need a sequel to do it. That's just not the way I see it. And I'm sure Gladiator II was never planned, like when they first made the first one, but who cares? It exists, right? So just judge it on its own. My issue is that how it actually is and the way the movie's made, I don't like, story-wise, I don't fully understand its purpose, because when you look at this movie, to me, what it feels like Ridley Scott wanted to do something very similar to the first Gladiator, but in modern times, like in terms of he wanted to do it with the modern technology that we have, because obviously the first movie was made in the year 2000, so the technology was a little bit different, and he knew, oh, we can do some crazy things nowadays, and I really like this, Roman aesthetic, so let's just do it again. Let's do a sequel. Let's go for it. But I don't think there was much of an idea of a story to tell, so they just kind of said, okay, let's do a story that makes sense as a sequel, but doesn't really feel like it's adding a lot to this character or this universe or just what's going on. It doesn't feel like its continuation has a bigger purpose, if that makes any sense. Maybe it's because of the type of evil they are going up against in this movie is pretty much the same thing, even if the characters are different, and a lot of the similar themes and ideas are kind of reused in a sense. So I don't really know what they could have done otherwise to have made this movie feel like more of a worthy sequel. But in terms of action and the scale of it, that is where it was far superior over the first, and I totally understood its purpose in that regard, because yeah, there were some crazy scenes that they couldn't have done 24 years ago. So I can appreciate it for that. But story-wise, I feel like they could have, there's more they could have added to it, and I just feel like they didn't go there. There was a lot of missed opportunities, I guess, is the best way to put it. Sure, I think you could have done a sequel with Lucius, with Luciella, you could have done this, but I just feel like they didn't go in any directions that exactly made itself seem like a worthy sequel, if that makes any sense. I'm trying my best to word it as well as I could, but that's the way I felt watching this. And ultimately it didn't matter too much because I still loved it. I still had a great time with it, but I couldn't help but feel that at least a little bit. The last negative I have is that there were some performances from a few different actors in this movie that I just felt didn't work for me. It wasn't necessarily one actor in particular. It was certain scenes, certain performances from certain characters, even some of the best performers. Even Paul Mescal had one or two scenes where I was like, was that really the best take they had of him? So I don't like blaming the actors for this, because I feel like sometimes it's not their fault. It's just a bad take that was taken, and then they went with the take, and then it ended up getting into the movie. But there's a couple of moments like that from at least 4 different characters, and I was just strange to me, because I was like, was that really that? It almost felt like they were rehearsing the scene. There's only a couple moments like that, but trust me, there's enough where I felt weird about it, and I was like, that just, I don't know, it doesn't feel like the best possible performance that character could have given. I don't know, especially because I know these actors are really good, so I know that doesn't really make a lot of sense that they would be giving bad performances, but it's just kind of what it felt like. Regardless, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great time. I just thought, when you're comparing it to the first movie, you're going to feel like it's being held back a little bit, and ultimately that leads to these negatives becoming more prominent. And maybe that's why I felt this way a little bit more so than I would have wanted to. But regardless, definitely worth the watch. I would give this movie a rating of an 8.4 to 10. I could maybe go lower or higher, depends on the day, to be honest, but I think an 8.4 sounds good to me. Unfortunately, not one of the better movies of the year, but it's up there. I would say it's probably my top 10 currently, so that's definitely a good thing. But like top 5, probably not that high, but still really enjoyed it, and definitely recommend going to see it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you want to leave a like or a comment, both would be appreciated. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.